Let's talk about 1945. What a year. On one hand, you have these epic, dramatic endings, the fall of entire empires and the end of the deadliest war in human history. But at the exact same time, it was a year of secret beginnings. As the world was out in the streets celebrating peace, the battle lines for a new, much colder conflict were already being drawn. This is the story of how the world we live in right now was forged in the chaos of one single unbelievable year. And this isn't going to be some dry history lesson about battles and treaties. No way. This is about the entire global rulebook getting torn up and completely rewritten from scratch. I mean, just try to imagine living through that. The entire world order you knew, the alliances, the enemies, the very map of the world was all about to be redrawn in just a few months. So, to really get a feel for just how massive these changes were, we've got to rewind. Let's go back to how the year began. The entire planet was on a total war footing. I mean, on every single continent, your whole life was defined by this one. Back on the home front, life was turned completely upside down. You know, factories that used to pump out cars, now they're making tanks. And women, well, they poured into the workforce like never before, taking jobs in factories, in the government, even in the military. This wasn't just a temporary fix. It completely changed the social fabric of nations forever. And the cost. Oh my gosh, the financial cost was just staggering. Governments were asking everyone, literally everyone, to pour their life savings into the fight by buying war bonds. And this wasn't some gentle suggestion, you know? It was seen as your patriotic duty. Victory wasn't cheap. It demanded total commitment, a personal sacrifice from every single citizen. Okay, so while all this is happening, while the fighting is still raging across the globe, the top Allied leaders are already getting together. They're trying to design the world that comes after all this. They saw themselves as the architects of victory, for sure, but they were also hoping, really hoping, they could build a lasting peace. So in February of 45, with the end of the war in Europe finally in sight, you get the big three. That's Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin meeting at a place called Yalta. And their to-do list, it was absolutely massive. They had to map out the end of the war and then design this whole new thing, the United Nations, to make sure a catastrophe like this could never, ever happen again. From the outside, it looked like they were all on the same page, a perfect picture of unity. But then, everything just started to fall apart. The world order they were so carefully trying to build began to unravel with, just shocking speed. A series of bombshell events in the spring of 1945 just tore the old world to shreds and threw the future into total chaos. And then, bam, April 12th, a shockwave absolutely rocks the Allied leadership. Franklin D. Roosevelt, the president who had guided America through the Depression and the war for over a decade, is dead. And just like that, Vice President Harry Truman is thrust into power. And this is a guy who was kept in the dark about almost everything, including the war's biggest secret of all, the atomic bomb. And it doesn't stop there. Just 2 weeks later, another major pillar of the old world falls. Benito Mussolini, Italy's fascist dictator, gets captured and executed by Italian partisans. You can just feel the dominoes falling, one after another, fast. And then comes the big one. At the start of May, as Soviet soldiers are fighting their way through Berlin, street by street, Adolf Hitler takes his own life in his bunker. The Third Reich, this empire he bragged would last 1,000 years, it dies right there with him. And just like that, it's over. The war in Europe is finally over. You can just imagine this massive wave of pure relief and joy sweeping across the entire globe. People are literally dancing in the streets. But here's the thing. They had no idea they were celebrating on the fault lines of a new, fractured world that was about to break wide open. So, with the old guard gone, a whole new cast of characters steps onto the world stage, and they're bringing new tensions, new priorities, and a dramatic shift in the global balance of power right along with them. The turnover in leadership was just stunning. Just look at the Potsdam Conference in July. Of the original big three from Yalta, only Stalin is left. Roosevelt is gone, replaced by Truman, and get this, right in the middle of the conference, Winston Churchill actually loses an election back home and is replaced by Clement Attlee. The powerful alliance that had won the war was now almost unrecognizable. So, one of the very first things this new trio decides is to issue the Potsdam Declaration, demanding the unconditional surrender of Japan. It was a final warning that would set the stage for the last and most terrible acts of the Second World War. But even as the world was trying to breathe a sigh of relief, celebrating peace, and trying to find justice for all the horrors of the war, something else was happening. A dark secret was taking shape. You see, right under the surface of all that Allied unity, the seeds of a brand new conflict were already being planted. Publicly, everything looked great. The Allies were putting on a united front. In November, the Nuremberg Trials kicked off, putting the top surviving Nazi leadership on trial for war crimes. The whole world was watching, and this was supposed to be a new chapter, a new standard for international justice, to make sure these kinds of atrocities could never, ever happen again. But behind closed doors, something truly chilling was being drafted. It had a code name, Operation Unthinkable, and it was commissioned by none other than Winston Churchill himself. But the target? It wasn't a resurgent Germany, no. The target was one of their own allies, the Soviet Union. You might be asking, why? Well, Churchill was watching Stalin break all the promises he'd made at Yalta. He saw the Soviets taking complete control over Eastern Europe, and he was terrified that one tyranny was just being swapped out for another. And the details of this plan, they're just mind-blowing. It called for a full-on surprise attack on the Soviet Union. It even explored using the brand new atomic bomb on Soviet cities instead of Japan. And maybe the most incredible part, it actually considered rearming surrendered Nazi troops to help with the assault. Now this tells you everything. Even before the ink was dry on Germany's surrender, the deep, deep mistrust between East and West was already setting the stage for the next global showdown. Which brings us to this one final chilling question. Sure, 1945 brought an end to the war against the Axis powers, but it immediately and secretly redefined who the enemy was. The end of World War II wasn't really an end at all, was it? It was the quiet, terrifying beginning of a 50-year Cold War.